The biometric lock on my front door chimed, a soft green light cutting through the dark porch. It was 11:45 p.m. on a Thursday. I had just spent 6 days in a windowless Dallas conference center, auditing commercial freight telematics and renegotiating Department of Transportation compliance logs for a regional logistics firm. The freezing November rain was soaking through the shoulders of my wool trench coat. All I wanted was a hot shower, absolute silence, and my own bed. So I dragged my ballistic nylon suitcase into the foyer, locked the deadbolt behind me, and dropped my keys onto the entryway table. The house was exactly as I had left it. The thermostat was set to 62 degrees. The mail was stacked neatly on the kitchen counter. I poured a glass of ice water at the granite island and hit the wall switch for the attached 2-car garage. The heavy insulated steel door rattled upward on its tracks, and the harsh overhead LED motion lights flickered to life. My parking space was completely bare. There was no shattered glass on the smooth gray epoxy floor. There were no pry marks on the exterior keypad. The side access door leading to the alley was deadbolted from the inside. The only physical evidence that my vehicle had ever been there was a faint, dry outline of high-performance tire treads near the back wall. I didn't own a standard commuter sedan. I owned a custom-ordered obsidian black 2024 Audi RSQ8. It was an $80,000 piece of German engineering featuring a twin-turbo V8 engine. It was fully paid off, insured exclusively under my name, and parked securely inside my private residence. I didn't drop my glass of water. I didn't run out into the suburban cul-de-sac in a panic, desperately scanning the dark street. I managed the active tracking of over 400 commercial freight liners across the eastern seaboard. I deal with unauthorized detours, hijacked assets, and breach perimeters every single day. I know what a forced entry looks like. And this wasn't one. I walked back into the kitchen, set my glass down, and pulled my smartphone from my coat pocket. I opened the encrypted dashboard from my home security system and accessed the interior garage camera, scrubbing the timeline backward from the current hour. At 2:15 p.m. on Tuesday afternoon, the interior door leading from the kitchen to the garage opened. My mother, Eleanor, stepped into the frame. She wasn't sneaking around. She was casually dressed in her usual suburban country club attire, carrying her designer handbag. Following right behind her was my 24-year-old brother, Chase. Chase was grinning. It wasn't a subtle, appreciative smile. It was the wide, arrogant grin of a kid who had never paid his own rent, let alone an $80,000 luxury performance SUV. He had wrecked 2 leased sedans in the last 3 years, on both of which my father had quietly paid off to avoid severe insurance spikes. In the high-definition video feed, Eleanor reached into her handbag and pulled out a heavy, metallic key fob, not a copy. The original factory spare fob that I kept locked inside a biometric fireproof safe in my home office. Eleanor tossed the fob to Chase. He caught it, clicked the unlock button, and the Audi's LED headlights flashed brightly in the dark garage. They both got into the vehicle. We hit the visor button to open the main garage door and backed my car out into the street in broad daylight. The footage ended. My parents had a physical emergency key to my house. I had given it to them 2 years ago specifically so they could check the basement sump pump if a pipe burst while I was out of the state. They did not have the biometric clearance for my office safe, which meant Eleanor had utilized her emergency access, bypassed my locked office door, and methodically hunted for the manual override key I kept hidden inside a hollowed-out textbook on the top shelf. They hadn't just borrowed a car. They had executed a coordinated, premeditated theft of an $80,000 asset. I didn't call the police immediately. I dialed my mother's cell phone. She answered on the 3rd ring. The background noise was loud, clinking silverware, loud laughter, the unmistakable acoustic ambiance of an expensive downtown steakhouse. "Morgan, honey, you're home early," Eleanor practically sang into the receiver. The sheer audacity of her cheerful tone echoed loudly through my quiet kitchen. How was Dallas? Did you secure the new freight contracts? Where is my Audi, Eleanor? I asked. My voice was completely flat. The background noise on her end muffled slightly, as if she had covered the microphone with her hand. When she spoke again, her tone shifted from cheerful to the practiced, a condescending hum of a mother preparing to justify the unjustifiable. Morgan, please don't use that tone. Eleanor sighed heavily. Chase just landed a massive final round interview for a regional sales director position. You know how hard he's been networking. Your father and I wanted to help him out. He has to drive out to the regional corporate retreat upstate this weekend, and he can't show up in his beat-up Honda. He needs to project success to the senior partners. So you broke into my office safe and removed my vehicle without my consent, I clarified, listing the facts exactly as they appeared on a liability ledger. Broke in? Morgan, stop being so dramatic, Eleanor scolded, her voice dripping with maternal entitlement. It's a family vehicle. You live in the city suburbs. You barely even drive it except on weekends. We knew you were out of town, and it was just sitting there collecting dust. We figured you wouldn't mind sharing. It's just a car, sweetheart. You make plenty of money. You can take an Uber to the office for a few days. I stared at the empty garage on my security monitor. They had actually convinced themselves that sharing a bloodline functioned as a legal title transfer. They assumed that because I was the older, responsible sibling who quietly paid her own bills and built a career in corporate logistics, I would simply absorb an $80,000 liability risk to avoid ruining a family dinner. You have exactly 30 minutes to instruct Chase to return the Audi to my driveway, park it, and leave the keys on the kitchen counter, I stated cleanly, checking my watch. Or what, Morgan? Eleanor snapped, dropping the sweet mother routine entirely. You're going to call the cops on your own brother on the night we're celebrating his big break over a piece of metal? Do you have any idea how selfish and pathetic that sounds? We are at Capitol Grill right now, paying for his dinner. He is leaving for the corporate retreat in the morning. I am not ruining his weekend because you refuse to be generous. 30 minutes, Eleanor, I repeated. Grow up, Morgan, she scoffed. We'll talk about this at Sunday dinner, when you've calmed down. The call disconnected. She honestly believed that the biological title of mother granted her absolute or unchallengeable immunity from the grand theft of a luxury vehicle. She believed I would just take an Uber to work tomorrow and sit quietly at Sunday dinner, while the golden child destroyed my transmission on a mountain pass. I didn't call her back to argue. Arguing with entitled people who believe they are untouchable is a massive waste of operational bandwidth. I walked into my home office. The door to my fireproof safe was hanging wide open, when the manual override key was sitting casually on my desk pad. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and bypassed the local municipal police precinct entirely. If I called the local beat cops, they would likely classify the situation as a civil family dispute, drive to the steakhouse, and ask my mother to sort it out. I didn't need local cops. I needed the state grid, because the Audi was a fully loaded 2024 RS model. I hadn't just relied on the factory GPS. Yet I had hardwired a commercial-grade, active cellular telematics transponder directly into the OBD2 port, the exact same encrypted hardware I use to track 20-ton freight trucks across international borders. I logged into my secure owner portal. The satellite dashboard loaded instantly. Chase wasn't at the steakhouse. He was currently driving southbound on Interstate 95, 60 miles outside the city limits, moving at 94 miles per hour in a 65 zone. He was driving nearly 30 miles an hour over the speed limit in a 2.5-ton, twin-turbo vehicle that didn't belong to him. I picked up my cell phone and dialed the direct, non-emergency dispatch line for the State Highway Patrol. State Highway Patrol Dispatch, Operator 42, a crisp, professional voice answered. My name is Morgan Ashford, I said, reading the vehicle identification number directly off my laptop screen. Though I am the sole registered owner of a 2024 Obsidian Black Audi RSQ8. The vehicle was removed from my private residence without my authorization. The spare key fob was obtained via forced entry into a locked residential safe. "Are you reporting the vehicle as stolen, ma'am?" the dispatcher asked, the tone immediately shifting from standard intake to rapid data entry. "Yes," I confirmed, my eyes locked on the pulsating red dot on the satellite map. Though I have the live commercial GPS telematics active on my screen. The vehicle is currently southbound on I-95, passing mile marker 112, traveling at 94 miles per hour. The driver is a 24-year-old male. He does not have my permission to operate the vehicle, and he is not listed on the insurance policy. The rapid clacking of a mechanical keyboard echoed through the receiver as the dispatcher fed the coordinates directly into the state highway grid. "We have a lock on the transponder ping, Miss Ashford," the dispatcher confirmed, her voice tightening with protocol. "We are flagging the plate in the National Crime Information Center database now. We have 2 intercept units currently stationed near mile marker 118. Stay on the line. We are initiating a felony traffic stop." "Hold the line, Ms. Ashford," the State Highway Patrol dispatcher instructed smoothly. Her voice was cool, mechanical, horny and entirely devoid of the suburban coddling my mother had just attempted to use on me. I could hear the heavy crackle of encrypted police radio traffic bleeding through her headset. Units 4 and 7 have established a visual on the Obsidian Audi RSQ8 southbound near the exit ramp for State Route 42. Radar confirms the speed at 96 miles per hour in a 65 zone. Does the suspect have a history of violent behavior or known firearms? I sat perfectly still in my home office, my eyes locked on the pulsating red telemetry icon moving steadily across the high-resolution satellite grid on my laptop. "The driver is my 24-year-old brother, Chase Ashford," I replied, my voice perfectly level. "He is currently unarmed. However, he has an extensive, documented history of severe, reckless driving, multiple at-fault collisions, and profound entitlement. He genuinely believes the vehicle belongs to him because my mother handed him the keys, and he will not expect a police intercept." "Understood," the dispatcher noted, the rapid clacking of her mechanical keyboard continuing without a pause. "The vehicle has been officially flagged as a stolen asset in the National Crime Information Center, the NCIC database, under a priority code. Once an NCIC stolen vehicle alert is transmitted to active highway patrol cruisers, the officers do not execute a standard traffic citation, Miss Ashford. They execute a high-risk felony extraction protocol." "Are you prepared to press formal charges when he is placed in custody?" "Yes," I stated without a single second of hesitation. "I am pressing full charges for grand theft auto and the unauthorized use of a commercial motor vehicle." "Copy that, initiating the stop." 65 miles south of my quiet suburban driveway, Chase Ashford was living an $80,000 fantasy. The interior cabin of my 2024 Audi RSQ8 was a masterpiece of German engineering, designed entirely around isolating the driver from the brutal reality of the road. The ambient LED lighting glowed softly in a cool, icy blue. The heavy acoustic dual-pane glass absorbed the massive roar of the twin-turbo V8 engine, and the freezing November rain lashing against the windshield, rendering the cabin virtually silent. My brother was cruising in the passing lane of Interstate 95 at a blistering 96 miles per hour, his left hand casually draped over the top of the heated or perforated leather steering wheel. He had the premium Bang & Olufsen 3D sound system turned up to 60%, the heavy bass vibrating the tinted windows. He hadn't waited until the morning to leave for his supposed corporate networking retreat like my mother had claimed. He had left the steakhouse early, taken my car, and was currently driving southbound toward a luxury casino resort across the state line to show off to his fraternity brothers. He was 24 years old, completely unemployed, driving a massive obsidian black machine that smelled like rich, new leather, and he hadn't paid a single cent for any of it. As he crossed the overpass near mile marker 116, his cell phone buzzed loudly in the center console. The digital dashboard flashed an incoming call from Eleanor. Chase reached down, hit the steering wheel button to accept the call, and the music automatically lowered. "Chase, honey, where are you right now?" my mother asked through the Bluetooth speakers. Her voice was uncharacteristically tight, the cheerful steakhouse ambiance completely gone. The loud clinking of expensive silverware had been replaced by the muffled sound of a car engine in the background. She was driving home in a panic. "I'm on the interstate, Mom, just passing exit 42, Chase said, leaning casually back into the bolstered leather seat. "What's up?" Did Dad finish his prime rib?" "Morgan is home from Dallas," Eleanor said sharply, skipping the pleasantries entirely. "She called me 20 minutes ago. She noticed the Audi was missing from her garage. I tried to explain to her that it was a family emergency and that you needed it for the corporate retreat, but she gave me a 30-minute ultimatum to return it." Chase rolled his eyes, resting his elbow on the windowsill. "Are you kidding me? Does she seriously care that much about a piece of metal? Tell her to chill out. I'll bring it back on Sunday night." "I did tell her that, Chase," my mother snapped, her maternal patience wearing thin against the friction of reality. "I hung up on her to teach her a lesson, but she bypassed the local precinct. Your father just checked the doorbell camera at her house through his phone app. There are no local cop cars parked in her cul-de-sac, which means she didn't call the beat cops to complain. She might have actually called the state police." Chase let out a sharp, derisive laugh. "Mom, stop. Morgan is a corporate stiff. She is not going to file a grand theft auto charge against her own brother over a weekend joyride. The cops would just laugh at her and tell her it's a civil dispute. You have the spare key. She can't prove I stole it." "Chase, listen to me," Eleanor insisted, genuine anxiety finally bleeding into her tone. "I don't care if she can prove it or not. Turn around right now. I am not risking your final interview tomorrow over a stupid temper tantrum. Take the next exit, drive the car back to her house, and leave the keys on the counter. Your father and I will deal with Morgan at Sunday dinner. Do not push her on this." Chase gripped the steering wheel harder, his knuckles turning white. His arrogant grin vanished, replaced by a deep, petulant scowl, and the idea of surrendering his $80,000 status symbol just to appease his sister enraged him. He wanted the car for the weekend. He needed it for the casino. He wasn't going to let his mother's sudden panic ruin his night. "No, Mom," Chase declared, his voice rising over the hum of the tires on the wet pavement. "I'm not driving 3 hours back in the rain because Morgan threw a fit. I'll text her tomorrow and tell her I took it. It's fine." "Chase Andrew Ashford, you turned that car around this My mother's voice was abruptly cut off, not by a dropped call, but by a blinding, explosive burst of light that completely flooded the interior of the cabin. Chase physically recoiled, throwing his arm up over his face. The rearview mirror was entirely consumed by a blinding wall of strobing red, blue, and white LED lights. It wasn't a single police cruiser pulling him over for a simple speeding ticket. There were 3 massive, or black and white State Highway Patrol Interceptor SUVs actively boxing him in. One cruiser was positioned aggressively on his left rear quarter panel, effectively trapping him against the concrete median. Another was blocking the middle lane to cut off his escape route. The deafening mechanical wail of a dual-tone federal siren instantly overpowered the Bluetooth call, vibrating the acoustic glass of the windows. Chase's survival instinct completely short-circuited. When he had been pulled over twice before in his leased sedans for minor speeding tickets, the local cops had casually walked up to his window, asked for his license, and handed him a citation. But this wasn't a traffic stop. This was a synchronized multi-vehicle tactical intercept. "Mom!" Chase screamed into the Bluetooth microphone, panic finally flooding his veins. "Mom, there are cops everywhere. They are boxing me in." "Chase, pull over immediately," my mother shrieked through the speakers. "Why put your hands on the wheel? Do not argue with them. Just tell them you borrowed the car from your sister. It's a family misunderstanding." The lead interceptor blasted its heavy air horn. 2 short, deafening bursts that commanded absolute compliance. A massive mechanical spotlight snapped on from the roof of the cruiser behind him, completely blinding him in the rear-view mirror. Chase slammed his foot on the massive carbon ceramic brakes, violently decelerating the heavy luxury SUV. He wrenched the steering wheel to the right, tires squealing loudly against the slick concrete as he violently forced the heavy Audi off the active lanes of Interstate 95 and onto the gravel shoulder. The vehicle skidded slightly before coming to a complete, shuddering halt near the metal guardrail. The 3 massive patrol cruisers slammed into park directly behind and beside him, the heavy thud of their doors opening echoing through the rain. Chase frantically reached for the center console, so trying to unbuckle his seatbelt to find his wallet. He assumed an officer was going to casually walk up to his window and ask for his registration. He assumed he could charm his way out of this with a story about a family emergency. He assumed wrong. The deafening, amplified boom of a police PA system completely shattered the silence of the dark highway, entirely drowning out the heavy rain and the idle of the twin-turbo engine. "Driver of the black Audi," the amplified voice commanded, echoing loudly off the surrounding trees. "Turn the engine off. Throw the keys out the driver's side window and extend both hands outside the vehicle. Do it now." Chase froze completely. He dropped his hands into his lap, staring into the driver's side mirror in absolute terror. He couldn't see the officers' faces, but in the harsh, flashing red and blue light, Chase saw the distinct, terrifying silhouettes of 3 state troopers actively using the heavy, reinforced steel doors of their cruisers for tactical cover, and they weren't holding ticket books. 2 of them had their service weapons drawn, and the 3rd officer was aiming a tactical patrol rifle directly at the rear windshield of the Audi. This wasn't a traffic violation. This was a felony takedown. "I said turn the vehicle off and throw the keys out the window." The megaphone roared again, the raw aggression leaving absolutely zero room for negotiation. "If you do not comply immediately, we will deploy lethal force." Chase's entire body began to tremble violently. He frantically hit the ignition button, killing the massive engine. He grabbed the heavy metallic spare key fob from the cup holder, rolled down his tinted window into the freezing sideways rain, and practically threw the keys out onto the wet asphalt. "I threw them!" Chase screamed into the dark, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, pathetic croak. When he instantly shoved both of his shaking hands entirely out the window, palms open. "Please don't shoot. I threw the keys. I'm just a kid." When a vehicle is flagged in the National Crime Information Center, NCIC database as an active stolen felony, the driver is automatically treated as a hostile threat to officer safety. "With your left hand only, pull the exterior door handle," the trooper commanded over the PA. "Open the door, kick it wide, and step out facing away from us." "I do not turn around." Chase fumbled blindly for the handle, yanking it open and stumbling out into the mud and the driving rain. He was wearing an expensive tailored blazer and designer jeans. The freezing November storm instantly soaked him to the bone. "Walk backward toward the sound of my voice," the loudspeaker ordered. "Do not lower your hands." Chase staggered backward along the wet asphalt, his designer sneakers slipping on the slick gravel, his hands raised high in the air. And he was sobbing loudly, the rain completely masking the sound of his terrified, breathless crying. "Wait, please!" Chase cried out over his shoulder. "This is my sister's car. She let me borrow it. It's a family car. You're making a mistake." "Stop!" the trooper yelled. "Drop to your knees. Now!" Chase's knees buckled. He dropped heavily onto the jagged wet gravel of the interstate shoulder, the sharp stones instantly tearing through the knees of his expensive jeans. The heavy, metallic clatter of handcuffs unspooling from a tactical belt echoed loudly. A massive state trooper closed the distance in 2 strides, forcefully grabbing Chase's wrists, twisting them violently behind his back and securing them with a pair of heavy, freezing steel handcuffs. The ratcheting click of the cuffs engaging echoed sharply in the quiet night. "Family car?" the trooper scoffed, hauling Chase to his feet and slamming him chest first against the wet hood of the Dodge Charger cruiser. The registered owner reported this vehicle stolen via a forced residential safe entry 40 minutes ago. You are under arrest for grand theft auto. The heavy steel door of the Dodge Charger Interceptor slammed shut with a definitive, ringing thud. Chase was abruptly sealed inside the pitch-black, suffocatingly cramped rear suspect cage. He slumped sideways onto the hard plastic bench, with his wrists screaming in agony from the tight metal handcuffs biting into his skin. His expensive tailored blazer was completely drenched, heavy with freezing November rainwater, and his carefully styled hair was plastered flat against his forehead. Outside, the freezing rain lashed relentlessly against the reinforced windows of the cruiser. Through the thick wire mesh of the security partition, Chase watched the absolute destruction of his weekend unfold in the harsh glare of the strobing red and blue tactical lights. 2 state troopers were meticulously clearing the interior of my Obsidian Audi RSQ8 with high-powered flashlights. They weren't treating it like a borrowed family vehicle. They were processing it as an active, contaminated crime scene. They documented the mileage, checked the glove box, and then bagged the empty energy drink cans Chase had casually tossed into the passenger footwell. Then, the low, mechanical rumble of a heavy diesel engine cut through the driving rain. A massive flatbed recovery wrecker, completely wrapped in the high-visibility yellow and green chevron decals of the State Department of Transportation, pulled aggressively onto the gravel shoulder. It wasn't a standard city tow truck. It was a specialized, heavy-duty commercial unit specifically dispatched for high-value felony impounds. The operator hopped out into the mud, engaged the loud hydraulic winch, and lowered the heavy steel ramp toward the rear tires of the Audi. Chase pressed his face against the cold, condensation-covered glass of the police cruiser, watching in absolute horrified disbelief as the heavy steel chains were hooked directly onto the undercarriage of the $80,000 piece of German engineering. The massive winch whined loudly, violently dragging the heavy twin-turbo vehicle backward through the mud and up the steep metal incline. The pristine tires squeaked sharply against the wet metal deck. The operator threw heavy nylon tie-down straps over all 4 wheels, ratcheting them down with intense, mechanical precision. My brother buried his face against his handcuffed wrists and sobbed hysterically. He had left the steakhouse feeling like a millionaire, eager to show off his stolen status symbol at a luxury casino. Now he was a freezing, terrified 24-year-old in the back of a squad car, watching his $80,000 prop being hauled away to a highly secured state environmental impound lot. The massive state trooper opened the front driver's side door of the cruiser, slid behind the heavy steering wheel, and wiped the rain from his face. He picked up his police radio and keyed the microphone. "Dispatch. Unit 7, the trooper reported, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Suspect is in custody. 1 adult male, 24, transporting him to the county intake facility now for grand theft processing. The stolen asset has been secured and transferred to the primary state impound." The cruiser pulled aggressively off the gravel shoulder, merging back onto Interstate 95. They weren't driving back to the steakhouse. They were driving to the county jail. 65 miles north, my quiet suburban kitchen was still warmly illuminated by the soft, ambient glow of the under-cabinet lighting. I was sitting perfectly still at the granite island, my laptop open in front of me. The commercial-grade cellular telematics dashboard displayed the live, pulsating red icon of my vehicle. It was no longer moving at 96 miles per hour. A sharp green notification banner had appeared at the top of the screen. Vehicle ignition terminated, speed 0 miles per hour. Asset in transit via secondary carrier. My cell phone, lying face down on the granite counter, abruptly began vibrating violently against the stone surface. The harsh, invasive buzzing shattered the quiet of my house. I checked my watch. It was exactly 1:15 a.m. I didn't immediately answer. I reached over, slowly poured the rest of my ice water down the stainless steel sink, and picked up the phone. The caller ID simply read, Eleanor, mobile. I hit the green accept button and put the phone on speaker, laying it flat next to my laptop keyboard. "Morgan!" my mother shrieked into the microphone. Her voice wasn't condescending or arrogant anymore. It was a high-pitched, raw scream of absolute, unfiltered hysteria that echoed violently off my kitchen cabinets. The background noise on her end was chaotic. Loud traffic, the frantic clicking of her blinker, and the heavy breathing of someone in the midst of a full-blown panic attack. Then she was driving, and she was terrified. "Morgan, what did you do?" Eleanor wailed. Chase's location tracking just went completely dark on my phone. I tried calling him 20 times, and it keeps going straight to voicemail. He called your father 2 minutes ago, screaming about police lights. Tell me you didn't actually call the police. Tell me you didn't arrest your own brother. I called the State Highway Patrol, Eleanor. I replied smoothly, my voice entirely devoid of emotion. I reported a stolen asset, and I provided them with the active commercial GPS coordinates to intercept it safely. He was just pulled over by state troopers on the interstate, my mother screamed, her breathing rapid and shallow, the panic suffocating her words. He was crying so hard he could barely breathe. They pulled him out of the car at gunpoint in the freezing rain. They threw him in handcuffs on the side of the highway. And he was just trying to drive to his networking event. He was driving 96 miles per hour in a stolen twin-turbo vehicle on a federal interstate, Eleanor, I stated, listing the facts exactly as they appeared on my telematics dashboard. The Highway Patrol executed a standard felony stop for a high-speed stolen asset. That is exactly what happens when you bypass a biometric safe and hand a violent piece of machinery to an unemployed 24-year-old with a documented history of reckless driving. "You have to stop this," my mother screamed, her voice cracking into a desperate sob. "Call the police station right now and tell them it was a massive mistake. Tell them you gave him permission to borrow the car. If he gets arrested for grand theft auto, it will permanently destroy his career. He has a final round interview for a corporate sales director position tomorrow morning. If he doesn't show up, they will give the job to someone else. You are ruining his entire life over a stupid car." It was the classic toxic playbook of the enabler. She assumed the legal system was a retail store. She assumed that if she just yelled loud enough or cried hard enough, I would simply call the manager of the police department and cancel a felony arrest like a mistaken food order. Yeah, she expected me to perjure myself, commit insurance fraud, and absorb massive liability just to protect her golden child from the consequences of his own arrogance. "I cannot call the police station and tell them it was a mistake, Eleanor," I explained, leaning back in my kitchen chair, "because it wasn't a mistake. And even if I wanted to perjure myself to protect Chase, the situation is completely out of my hands. On the moment the State Highway Patrol logged the vehicle as stolen in the National Crime Information Center database, the incident escalated beyond a simple civil complaint." There was a sharp, terrified silence on the line, the heavy, rhythmic breathing of my mother trying to process the absolute destruction of her golden child's weekend echoed through the speaker. "What do you mean it's out of your hands?" Eleanor whispered, her voice trembling violently. "You are the owner. Why just drop the charges?" "I am the registered owner, yes. I confirmed calmly, turning my laptop screen slightly to view the automated insurance protocol that had just activated in my inbox. But my commercial fleet underwriter holds the liability policy on that $80,000 asset. When a felony theft report is officially filed and a vehicle is violently extracted on a state highway, the insurance company automatically locks the legal file to prevent insurance fraud. I picked up a pen from the counter and tapped it once against my legal pad. If I suddenly call the state troopers and claim I accidentally reported my own car stolen while my brother was driving it nearly 100 miles per hour across state lines, the Insurance Fraud Division will immediately launch a criminal investigation into me for filing a false police report. I continued, my tone flat and mechanical. I am not risking my spotless record, my corporate logistics career, and 10 years in a federal penitentiary to cover up a felony theft you orchestrated. Morgan, please, Eleanor wailed in the background, entirely abandoning reason. I am driving to the precinct right now. I am going to tell the desk sergeant that this is a massive family misunderstanding. I will tell them I gave him the keys and that you are just being vindictive. I will demand they release him immediately. You cannot buy your way out of a grand theft auto charge, Eleanor, I stated cleanly. I am retaining an elite criminal defense attorney right now. My father's deep, booming voice suddenly cut through the speakerphone. He had clearly snatched the phone from my mother's trembling hands. The patriarch of the family, attempting to reclaim control of the chaos. And when this is over, we are completely cutting you off from this family. Do you hear me? You are dead to us, Morgan. Dead. Understood, I said quietly. I disconnected the call, placed the phone face down on my desk, and closed my laptop. They completely failed to realize that when you steal an actively tracked, highly insured corporate asset, the response isn't an argument at a family dinner table. The response is a badge, a gun, and a set of heavy steel handcuffs. At 8:15 a.m. on Friday morning, now the air inside the front lobby of the State Highway Patrol Regional Precinct smelled overwhelmingly like wet wool, industrial floor wax, and stale, burned coffee. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a low, irritating hum that seemed to vibrate directly into the concrete floor. I didn't rush to the station in a panic. I had slept for exactly 6 hours, taken a hot shower, and dressed in a tailored navy blue blazer over a crisp white blouse. And I sat quietly on a hard plastic bench in the corner of the waiting room, holding a slim manila folder and my encrypted smartphone. I had arrived 30 minutes prior to provide my formal, sworn statement to the primary auto theft detective and sign the release authorization for my impounded vehicle. 30 feet away, standing aggressively at the thick, bulletproof glass of the front dispatch desk, were my parents. Arthur and Eleanor had clearly spent the entire night frantically driving around the county trying to locate their golden child. Arthur's usually immaculate suit was severely wrinkled, his tie loosened, and his face flushed a dark, violent red with exhaustion and suppressed rage. Eleanor looked like she had aged 10 years overnight. Her designer makeup was smeared, her hair disheveled, and she was clutching her expensive leather handbag so tightly her knuckles were completely white. I am demanding to see the shift commander immediately!" Arthur bellowed through the small circular speaker grill in the thick plexiglass. His booming, patriarchal voice echoed loudly across the scuffed linoleum floor. My son, Chase Ashford, was violently removed from his vehicle last night on Interstate 95 by your troopers. He was held at gunpoint in the freezing rain over a massive misunderstanding. He is supposed to be at a corporate interview right now, and you have held him in custody for 9 hours without bail. This is false imprisonment. The desk sergeant, a veteran officer with deep bags under his eyes, didn't flinch at the shouting. He simply clicked his computer mouse, staring blankly at his glowing monitor. "Sir, your son is not being held for a traffic citation," the sergeant stated, his voice a flat mechanical drone of municipal exhaustion. Then he was intercepted operating a motor vehicle flagged in the National Crime Information Center as an active, high-priority stolen asset. He is currently in holding cell 3, awaiting transfer to the county courthouse for a felony arraignment on charges of grand theft auto and reckless endangerment. Bail cannot be set until he faces a magistrate. "It wasn't stolen!" Eleanor shrieked, slamming her palm flat against the bulletproof glass. The sudden, a violent smack made a junior officer behind the desk jump slightly. She completely abandoned any pretense of suburban civility. My daughter, Morgan, is the registered owner of that Audi. She reported it stolen out of pure vindictive spite because we borrowed it while she was out of town. It's a family car. We have the keys. Look at her sitting right there. She's the one who lied to you. Eleanor whipped around, pointing a trembling finger directly at me across the lobby. "Morgan, I get up here right now and tell this officer the truth," Eleanor commanded, her voice cracking into a high-pitched, desperate sob. "Tell him you gave Chase the keys. Tell him you made a mistake. If you don't drop these charges this exact second, I swear to God, we will disown you completely. Chase is losing his entire career because of your temper tantrum." I didn't flinch. I didn't stand up. I simply looked at her, my expression entirely devoid of emotion. "I didn't make a mistake. Eleanor," I said quietly, my voice carrying easily across the empty lobby, "and I didn't give him the keys." The heavy steel door next to the dispatch desk suddenly clicked open. A tall man in a plain gray suit and a slightly loose necktie stepped into the lobby. He carried a heavy black tactical clipboard and a steaming styrofoam cup of coffee. He was Detective Miller, the lead investigator assigned to the Auto Theft Task Force. Then I had spoken to him on the phone at 3 a.m., when the troopers officially processed the Audi into the impound lot. "Mr. and Mrs. Ashford," Detective Miller said, taking a slow sip of his coffee. He didn't look angry. He just looked incredibly tired of dealing with entitled people. "I am Detective Miller. I am handling the felony extraction of the 2024 Audi RSQ8. Are you the parents of the suspect currently in holding?" Arthur immediately puffed out his chest. Was stepping squarely in front of the detective, attempting to reclaim the physical dominance of the situation. "Yes, we are, Detective," Arthur announced, his booming voice attempting to mask his sheer panic. "And I am formally requesting that you release my son immediately. This entire situation is a catastrophic overreaction by my daughter. She was out of town on business. We had a family emergency. We accessed her home, retrieved the spare key, and allowed our son to use the vehicle to attend a corporate retreat. She is utilizing your department as a weapon in a personal family dispute. There was no theft. The vehicle was borrowed with implied familial consent." It was a brilliant, desperate legal maneuver. Arthur was attempting to legally redefine the theft as unauthorized use or a civil domestic dispute. In many jurisdictions, if a family member has open access to a home and casually borrows a car, the police will often refuse to press felony charges, telling the owner to handle it in civil court. Arthur assumed the police would take one look at a wealthy, well-dressed suburban family and simply let his son walk out the front door with a warning. He assumed wrong. "Implied familial consent," Detective Miller repeated slowly, his tone completely flat. He looked down at his clipboard, then looked directly at my mother. "Mrs. Ashford, did your daughter explicitly give you permission to enter her home and remove the spare key fob for the $80,000 vehicle?" Eleanor instantly saw an opening. She assumed the detective was looking for an excuse to close the paperwork and go home. She assumed that if she confessed to being the primary actor, the police would simply laugh it off. After all, the police don't arrest wealthy, middle-aged suburban mothers for borrowing their daughter's car. "No, Detective, she didn't," Eleanor admitted, her voice dripping with maternal confidence, throwing her shoulders back. She was actively throwing herself on the grenade to save her son, completely unaware that the grenade was already live. Morgan is incredibly selfish with her money. I knew she would say no, but I am her mother. I have an emergency key to her house. So I let myself in, I went into her home office, and I took the spare key fob from her safe. I gave the keys to Chase. I told him he could use it. My son didn't steal anything. He was acting under my explicit permission. Eleanor crossed her arms, a smug, triumphant smirk finally returning to her exhausted face. She looked at me across the lobby, her eyes flashing with pure arrogance. She had just provided her golden child with an ironclad alibi. If she gave him the keys, he couldn't be charged with grand theft auto. Detective Miller didn't smile. He didn't close his clipboard. He took another slow sip of his coffee, the silence in the lobby stretching on for several agonizing seconds. "Let me make sure I understand you clearly, ma'am," Miller said, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous register that instantly commanded the entire room. "You are officially stating on the record inside a police precinct that you utilized an emergency key to enter a private residence without authorization from the owner?" Eleanor frowned, her smug smile faltering slightly. "Well, yes, but it's my daughter's house. I'm not a stranger." "And you are further stating," Miller continued, pulling a pen from his breast pocket, "that you bypassed a locked home office, intentionally located a manual override key, and opened a locked, biometric fireproof safe specifically to remove a high-value automotive asset." Arthur's face suddenly went completely pale. The patriarchal confidence evaporated entirely. He realized exactly what his wife had just done. "Eleanor—" "I stop talking," Arthur hissed, grabbing her arm violently. "Do not say another word." "Why should I stop?" Eleanor snapped, pulling her arm away, completely oblivious to the legal trap closing around her throat. She looked back at the detective, her voice rising in defensive hysteria. "Yes, detective, I opened the safe. I took the key because my son needed a car and she wasn't using it. It's not a crime to borrow a key from your own child." "Actually, ma'am," Detective Miller said, clicking his pen with a sharp, definitive snap, "it is." I finally stood up from the hard plastic bench. I picked up my manila envelope, walked calmly across the linoleum floor, and stopped directly next to the detective. I didn't look at my mother. I looked entirely at Miller. "Detective," I stated smoothly, handing him the envelope. "Inside is a high-resolution, time-stamped flash drive containing the interior security footage of my garage, the foyer, and the home office. It clearly documents two individuals, Eleanor and Chase Ashford, coordinating the unauthorized entry into my biometric safe and the subsequent removal of the vehicle." Eleanor stared at the envelope, her mouth slightly open, the blood completely draining from her face. "Thank you, Ms. Ashford," Miller noted, placing the envelope firmly onto his clipboard. He looked back at my mother, his expression completely devoid of sympathy. "Mrs. Ashford," Miller announced, and his voice echoing loudly off the bulletproof glass, "you just formally confessed to premeditated residential burglary by admitting that you illegally entered a secured safe to remove an $80,000 asset. You did not exonerate your son. You simply admitted to being the primary co-conspirator in a Class B felony." Arthur let out a low, pathetic groan, burying his face in his hands. He stepped entirely away from his wife. "Burglary?" Eleanor whispered, her voice cracking into a high-pitched, pathetic croak. Her knees buckled slightly and she grabbed the edge of the dispatch desk to keep from collapsing. "No, wait, you can't arrest me. I'm a mother. It was just a car. I didn't break anything. I used a key." "You used an emergency key to commit a felony theft, ma'am," Miller corrected smoothly. pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from the back of his belt. And your son is currently sitting in a holding cell because he was caught driving the stolen asset nearly 30 miles over the speed limit. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. The heavy, metallic, ratcheting click of Detective Miller's steel handcuffs engaging around my mother's expensive, manicured wrists echoed violently against the bulletproof glass of the dispatch desk. Eleanor let out a sharp, breathless gasp. The condescending suburban matriarch who had cheerfully told me to stop being dramatic and take an Uber to work just 12 hours earlier completely vanished. Her designer handbag dropped heavily onto the scuffed linoleum floor, spilling her expensive makeup, a set of house keys, and a crumpled receipt from the downtown steakhouse she had visited the night before. "Arthur, tell him to stop," Eleanor wailed, twisting desperately against the detective's unyielding grip. When the harsh fluorescent lights illuminated the absolute, unfiltered terror in her eyes as the cold steel bound her arms behind her back. "Arthur, I'm your wife. Do something. He is arresting me for borrowing a car. This is a family misunderstanding. Tell Morgan to drop the charges." Arthur didn't step forward. The booming, patriarchal confidence that had carried him into the precinct, screaming at the desk sergeant minutes ago, was entirely gone. He took a slow, deliberate step backward, more physically distancing himself from the woman who had just formally confessed to premeditated residential burglary directly to the lead investigator of the auto theft task force. He looked at her, his face completely pale and slick with a cold sweat, realizing that his own legal exposure was dangerously close if he intervened. I wasn't there, Eleanor," Arthur stammered, his voice thin, reedy, and vibrating with an unvarnished survival instinct. He looked wildly around the lobby, raising his hands in a gesture of pathetic surrender to the detective. "I was at work when she went to Morgan's house. I didn't touch the safe. I didn't tell her to take the car. I am not involved in this." Eleanor stopped struggling entirely. She stared at her husband, her mouth slightly open in sheer, horrifying disbelief. He was actively abandoning her to save his own skin, just as quickly as she had abandoned all logic to save their golden child. "You're not involved," Eleanor shrieked, her voice cracking into a high-pitched, pathetic croak. "You paid for the steak dinner to celebrate Chase getting the car. You were sitting next to me when I hung up on her. You knew she was out of town." "Ma'am, stop talking," Detective Miller advised calmly, securing the second cuff and resting his hand firmly on her shoulder. "Anything further you say in this lobby is being actively recorded by the precinct security cameras. You are under arrest for residential burglary, with larceny of a motor vehicle, and conspiracy to commit grand theft auto. You have the right to remain silent." Miller looked over his shoulder at the desk sergeant. "Sergeant, take her back to intake and process her. Place her in a separate holding cell from the male suspect. They are co-defendants in an active felony." A female officer emerged from the heavy steel security door, grabbed Eleanor firmly by the arm, and escorted her out of the public lobby. My mother didn't fight back anymore. She just sobbed uncontrollably, her expensive shoes dragging across the floor as the heavy door slammed shut behind her, sealing her inside the massive county jail system. Arthur stood frozen in the center of the lobby, completely alone. His son was locked in holding cell 3 for grand theft auto, and his wife had just been arrested for breaking and entering. He slowly turned his head and looked at me. The arrogant, the booming father who had threatened to cut me off from the family the night before was completely broken. "Morgan, please," Arthur whispered, his voice trembling violently. "They are your family. Your mother is 62 years old. She can't go to jail. Chase is going to lose his final round interview this afternoon. If you don't call the district attorney and fix this, they are going to go to federal prison. Please. I will buy you a new car. I will pay you whatever you want. Oh, just tell them it was a mistake." I didn't smile. I simply adjusted the strap of my leather laptop bag on my shoulder and looked at him with absolute technical indifference. "I cannot fix it, Arthur," I stated cleanly, checking my watch, because my commercial fleet underwriter already locked the liability policy when the State Highway Patrol initiated the felony stop. And if I attempt to recant a sworn statement involving an $80,000 asset after my mother just confessed to burglary on a police camera, I will be indicted for insurance fraud. I picked up my manila folder and turned toward the precinct dispatch desk to sign my release forms. "You don't need to cut me off from the family," I noted quietly over my shoulder, "because I just cut the family off from my assets." I slid my driver's license under the bulletproof glass, signed the heavy stack of impound release paperwork, and walked out the double doors into the freezing November morning without looking back. Over the next 6 months, the state legal system executed a master class in bureaucratic destruction. Because Eleanor had formally confessed to the residential burglary on camera inside a police precinct, the district attorney refused to offer a quiet, suburban plea deal for a family dispute. She was formally indicted on multiple felony counts of breaking and entering and grand larceny. Chase was indicted for receiving stolen property, reckless endangerment, and felony evasion for operating an $80,000 stolen vehicle nearly 30 miles over the speed limit across state lines. Arthur was forced to completely liquidate his pristine retirement stock portfolio just to post their massive combined bail bonds and retain an elite criminal defense attorney. The exorbitant legal fees completely drained the family's savings. Chase entirely missed his final round interview for the regional sales director position while sitting in the county holding cell. When the corporate hiring manager ran a standard background check and discovered a pending felony grand theft auto charge, they immediately rescinded his candidacy and blacklisted him from the industry. The golden child went from a 24-year-old expecting to drive an $80,000 luxury SUV to a terrified defendant facing years in state prison, forced to take a minimum wage retail job just to pay his court-mandated restitution fees. Eleanor's pristine suburban reputation was completely obliterated. Her country club revoked her membership the exact morning her mugshot was published in the local county arrest log. My commercial insurance policy covered the heavy-duty towing and impound fees for the Audi. The State Highway Patrol released my vehicle back to me 48 hours later, completely unharmed. I hired a specialized security firm to upgrade the biometric locks on all the exterior doors of my house, permanently revoked my parents' emergency access codes, and filed a permanent restraining order against my entire family, which a judge granted without a second of hesitation. They thought they could use a family title to steal a massive, highly insured corporate asset. They thought I would simply panic, absorb the liability, and take an Uber to work to protect my brother's weekend joyride. They completely forgot that a commercial logistics director doesn't argue with car thieves. I just tracked the telemetry, called the Highway Patrol, and let the state handle the rest. If your entitled family broke into your home safe, stole your $80,000 luxury vehicle, and laughed at you when you demanded it back, would you have tracked the car and called the Highway Patrol? Or would you have just let them borrow it to keep the family peace? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of absolute satellite-tracked justice, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. See you in the next video.